Hello and welcome to Cinematic Discomfort, disturbing films dissected through human experience, the podcast where we discuss the movies that challenge us and why. If you're new here, don't worry, so am I. Get comfy and maybe we can be friends and figure this whole thing out together. I'm your host Charlotte, and I'm here to be your guide to help you navigate through the difficult and complicated emotions brought up by quote-unquote disturbing movies. The worst thing a movie can do is be boring, so I want to talk about the ones that we can't quite shake. Art isn't always pretty. Sometimes the whole point is to make you uncomfortable and make you question things. What we're here to do is underline those questions and see if the answers we come up with can help us learn more about ourselves and the world around us. We do tough subjects, we do dark humor, we do research rabbit holes, and we do tangents. Today's cinematic discomfort is the 2015 film Lamb, written, directed, and starring Ross Partridge. Let me just say right now that if you're here for a conversation about the 2021 A24 Icelandic film, you're in the wrong place, but we'll get to that. The Lamb we're talking about today is an indie movie that debuted at Sundance and I would say has a pretty limited reach. Looks like it made just over $30,000 worldwide, so I'm not going to be surprised if you haven't seen it or even heard of it. We're starting things off here with a deep cut. I had a lot of feelings about this one and I just had to talk about it. Most sources have a synopsis of something like, when a man meets a young girl in a parking lot, he attempts to help her avoid a bleak destiny by initiating her into the beauty of the outside world. The journey shakes them in ways neither expects. I guess that's one way to describe this movie, but I feel like it's really underselling it in a lot of ways. I would say it's the story of a sad and lonely older man using ideas of freedom and beauty to lure a sad and lonely young girl into a twisted romantic relationship that is doomed to end badly. In case you haven't seen the film, content warnings for this episode include lots of discussion about child sexual abuse, grooming, pedophiles, and related topics. Though the film itself is not graphic, it's certainly on this show for a reason. It's a very uncomfortable watch. If that sounds like too much for you, I totally understand. Take care of yourself. This might not be the right episode for you, and I promise we'll diversify our subject matter overall. I also want to be clear that I don't censor my language, so there will be no unaliving or grape or pew-pews on this podcast. If we're going to talk about these topics, we're going to do it in plain terms. If you're staying with me, get yourself a snack, drink some water, because I had a lot to say about this movie. All right, let's get to it. Hello! Alright, so just to start out with, I know there's bound to be some confusion about this movie because of the other movie with the same title, so I want to explain how I found this movie because it was both random and unfortunate. I was looking for movies to watch, and I saw an Instagram reel where a guy was suggesting something like folk horror movies you have to see. And the first movie he listed was The Damned from 2024. And I'm a very suggestible person, so I just immediately switched over and watched that without even finishing the reel. It was great, really dark, like physically it's a very difficult to watch movie because you can't see what's happening, but it was great. And then I went back to the reel and the next movie he started talking about was Lamb, and he said, don't look up anything about the movie, it's best to go in blind. And I know you don't know this about me, but that is one of my most favorite activities. If I get what I think is a solid recommendation on a movie, I love nothing more than to go into it knowing as little as possible. I don't even watch trailers. I don't want to know. But I went to my favorite, definitely legal movie streaming site, typed in Lamb, and this is the movie that came up first. So I just started it right up. I was maybe an hour into it before I realized that it was, one, not a folk horror movie, and two, not the movie the video had been talking about at all. Oddly enough, I still haven't managed to watch the other one, but, obviously I've heard it's good. But I do feel like that really colored the way that I approached the first viewing of this movie overall. Like, I definitely was more suspicious of every interaction and kept waiting for things to go more horribly wrong than what they already were. I do remember thinking the whole time that the movie wasn't scaring me, but it was pissing me off and making me very uncomfortable. Certainly more on that later. Truly, for me, it was a very difficult movie to watch. But yes, overall, I think this is a movie that, if you're not expecting it to become a horror movie, could really lull you into a false sense of security because it's shot so beautifully. I did look up the cinematographer, Nathan Miller, and he hasn't done anything else that I'm familiar with, but at this point I might have to seek him out because this movie is really gorgeous. It's also very well acted. I think both of the main actors are very restrained in their roles, where I can imagine lesser actors would have been tempted to go bigger, and that would have really cheapened the movie for me. Also, I've seen this movie 2 or 3 times now, once on my own and then once or twice more for the purposes of this episode, and I'll be very happy never to watch it again. This is a podcast about discomfort, and I'll tell you, this one really hits the nail on the head. I have been thoroughly discomforted. I'm going to assume that most of our listeners have not seen this movie and may not have access to it. I didn't see it on any of the normal streaming websites. I think it might be on Canopy, but honestly, I still can't figure out how to work that. If you feel like giving up $4, you can rent it at the usual places, or if you have any alternative ways of watching movies for free, it's definitely out there to find. But in case any of you guys are lacking that kind of money and or ingenuity, I want to go through the film pretty thoroughly to give everybody a good idea of what actually happens, and there's definitely a lot to talk about as we go. So there will be spoilers in case you do want to watch the movie before you go through the rest of this with us. I want to preface all this by saying that it's an incredibly well-made movie. As I said, the cinematography is beautiful and effective, the score is subtle. Most of the movie is these 2 main actors, and they do an amazing job conveying some difficult emotional concepts. It's largely the subject matter that I have an issue with, and the main character himself just as a human being. So if it comes off like I hate this movie, I want to be clear that it's not because I don't think it's a good movie in that sense. So the movie starts off by showing us David, our alleged protagonist, a man in his mid-40s who's clearly very sad and not at a great place in his life. He's checking in with his dying father, who seems like a cranky and miserable human being. Really just every trope you can think of the dying alcoholic asshole father who can't or won't take care of himself and just sits in a dirty recliner chair in a dark room waiting to die. The thing that I wanted to mention from this scene is that he says to his dad very seriously, which is the only way that David speaks, "I need to ask you something." And his dad says, "Leave me alone, I got no answers." And to my knowledge, there is no follow-up on this. We never get any clue as to what David is asking his father. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it's just to show that his dad is a brick wall and not interested in whatever deathbed reconciliation David's trying to push for. No idea. Then he's checking in with his secret office girlfriend, who heard around the water cooler that his wife kicked him out. There's a lot to unpack in that sentence. It tells us that he's technically married, that he and his wife are having trouble, that she kicked him out and he's staying at a hotel, and that he's having an affair with a younger coworker. So this doesn't do a lot to make him a really sympathetic character. Obviously, he's going through a lot at the time, but also he's been cheating on his wife for a while. So he's positioned as maybe not the worst guy, because he seems better than his father, but definitely not a great guy. The thing that I wanted to flag from this scene that's going to come back later is that when he's talking dirty with his girlfriend on the phone, he tells her to do that thing, and she starts with, "We go away together," and starts spinning this like sexy romantic story for him. And the thing that he insists on her saying to him is, "This is what we do." And we'll talk about that in a bit. We get a few shots of our other main character, the young Tommy, who is 11 years old. She's at home, and she just seems kind of poor and lonely. Her room is dark and dingy, and I think what we're supposed to see is that she's trying to figure out how to alter her clothes to look sexier. So now a little time has passed for David. We see him in a suit at the cemetery at his father's grave. So his dad just died, they didn't have a good relationship anyway, and his love life is in trouble as well. He's lonely, depressed, drifting. I want to say something for our listeners. If you haven't seen the movie yet, you won't have the full context for this, but stick with me. When I decided to do this episode, I had seen the movie only once, maybe a year or two before. I did a lot of my initial note-taking just based on my memory of the film and on articles and things that I read, and most of them talk a lot about the ambiguity and how David doesn't actually do anything wrong and the movie is all just kind of weird vibes with no real confirmation. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm being too hard on David's character because of my own personal bias. Maybe there's more ambiguity to it, and I'm just not giving him the benefit of the doubt because I'm predisposed to be negative toward pedophiles, which is a morally correct bias to have, by the way. Don't at me on that one. But then I watched this fucking movie again, guys, and I'm still not seeing as much gray area as I had been led to believe. This is like when I bought a copy of Lolita and the blurbs on the back were talking about how it's a hilarious comedy. Fucking where? I read the damn book. It's not funny. It's gross. It's upsetting. It's sad. No humor to be found. And something that we're going to come back to in detail is that much of the discussion I was able to find of the movie, there's not a ton, centers around the ambiguity of David's actions and whether he's actually doing anything inappropriate with Tommy at any point. I don't remember where I saw this and I don't have it in my notes, but something along the lines of, is this a story about a man trying to reclaim innocence in a corrupt world or a man grooming a child? And I would say that the two aren't mutually exclusive. Even if his intent is the former, it leads to his actions, which are the latter. So, periodically, as we go through at least the first act of this movie, I'd like to take normal person check-ins where we can stop and wonder, is this a thing that a normal person would do? Just to keep things in perspective. Is there actually an innocent perspective possible here? I tried to think of who a good normal person actor is that we can use as a stand-in, and I'm thinking of Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is a normal guy that I would trust around my kids, if I had any. So when we're going through this movie and watching David interact with Tommy, I want us to think, what would Tom Hanks do? So now we get to the point in our movie where the two worlds collide. Tommy is dressed like a baby hooker outside the mall and trying to score cigarettes from strangers. David does in fact give her a cigarette, which is obviously not great. And then he says, "All right, put it in your mouth," and then lights it for her. I didn't care for that at all. He also asks her what's in her purse, which is just a weird question, and then says, "I just buried my father," which is a hell of a non sequitur, and asks her if she's been to a wake. As someone who worked in customer service for many years, this is somewhat of a pet peeve of mine, also just as someone who struggles with small talk and empathy. Sorry to get off topic already, but there's an episode of one of my favorite podcasts, Creepcast, where they're talking about the story Baraska. And there's a scene where the main character is this teen boy who's working in a sandwich shop, and his boss has been really upset and crying for a while in her office. So the main character calls her husband just to let him know, and the husband comes in. So the main character is making the guy a sandwich, and he just starts spilling out all this exposition about how he and his wife have been struggling with infertility and it's causing problems in their marriage. Meanwhile, the main character is just making him a sandwich and not really knowing what to say. And the hosts really have a field day with just how clunky and awkward that bit of dialogue is. It's like, what are you expecting the young person that you're talking to is going to be able to give you advice on this? Like, they've dealt with this situation before? I don't understand what the outcome is that you're really looking for here. But having spent time with the general public, I can tell you it's absolutely accurate to the way that people treat people they think are below them, whether that's minors or service workers, or in the case of that story, both. It also makes me think of that pilot character in Airplane, one of my favorite movies.
You ever been in a cockpit before? You ever seen a grown man naked? Joey, you ever hang around the gymnasium? Joey, you like movies about gladiators?
Another unimportant thing to bring up here is that I noticed the second time I watched the movie is that after this scene, the next time we see David, he mentions that he stopped smoking and it just never comes up again. No cravings or anything, which makes it feel like a lazy plot device to get them to meet. For me, it could be any number of reasons for them to meet. Having it be this situation specifically, that Tommy is dressed older and asking for cigarettes, sets her up as someone who is at least trying to be more mature for her age, and someone who is prone to misbehavior. If she had walked up to him in overalls and a backwards hat and asked for $1 for the bus or to buy a soda, it wouldn't have the same impact, and it wouldn't set up the kind of phallic interaction where he gets to tell her to put it in her mouth and then lights her cigarette for her. David tells Tommy that her friends are laughing at her because they don't really like her, and decides that she needs to teach these friends a lesson by making them think she's been kidnapped. So he grabs her really roughly by the arm and jokingly, but also kind of not jokingly, forces her into his car and makes it a point to drive by where her friends are hiding, and then takes her back to her house. It seems like they don't really talk between when he asks her where she lives and when he drops her off, and the conversation goes like this.
Look, I'm sorry. I'm not a bad guy, but I could have been. You think we should go inside and tell your parents what happened?
Nobody's home.
You have any brothers or sisters? You think your friends went into one of the stores and told people what happened?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
So with that, it starts innocently enough. Or at least that's probably what he's telling himself. I think this is a good time for a normal person check-in. So what would Tom Hanks do? I would start by not giving her a cigarette. Maybe give her his jacket to cover up with. Maybe walk over to a drive-thru, buy her some french fries and talk to her. Or go inside the mall, buy her a pretzel. Make sure everything's okay at home. Talk to her about how to make better friends. He might possibly offer her a ride home still, and then also caution her against taking rides from strangers, but it would be done in a less creepy way. From the start, I feel like Tommy as a character was directly telegraphed to me. I was a young kid with a broken home, and I spent a lot of time hanging out with other kids who, in retrospect, did not actually like me very much. The older men I interacted with were more of the online variety, rather than strangers walking up to me in parking lots, but the rest is very similar. So at this point in the movie, I'm already very invested in this girl's safety and well-being. On the other hand, I've seen this movie 2 or 3 times now, and still, when I play it back in my head, I can't picture the main character. He's either Dermot Mulroney or he's Jason Bateman. I don't know if it's just because Ross Partridge is not a particularly famous actor, but I just can't seem to keep his face in my mind. And then we have a scene with David at work where it seems that his office affair has been found out, and it's also kind of implied that he fucked up some other stuff at work too, and his boss kind of forces him to take some time off. And then he has sex with his girlfriend in the stairwell, like any good employee, and he makes her say the thing to him again. So then David goes back to the parking lot where he and Tommy met the first time, Presumably, I guess it could be a different parking lot. I'm not great with locations. My assumption would be that he went back to the same place, hoping to find her. And aren't all mall parking lots spiritually the same place anyway? But he says, I've thought about you a lot since yesterday. I was worried I hurt you. Gross. They finally introduce themselves to each other, except that he calls himself Gary. I will not be addressing him as such, because it makes it confusing to me to talk about, and also because fuck that guy. There's never any explanation given as to why he does this. I think if you want to give him the benefit of the doubt, it's just a form of escapism for him, like putting on a different identity. But if you're less generous, it's harder for her to report him or get him into some kind of trouble. I can tell you that it's definitely not something Tom Hanks would do. He'd give her his business card with his full name and where he works and his cell phone number and tell her to call if she's ever in trouble. David offers to buy her lunch and they eat in his car instead of a restaurant, which is telling. Like, why don't you want to be seen in public with this young girl? I wonder. She offers to give him her email address and he says, why? Are we going to see each other again? And this, to me, definitely is too flirty for my taste. In any case, David and Tommy continue to hang out. We get this quasi-romantic montage of them spending time together, and it's always alone. Just the two of them together, walking around outside, hanging out, eating food. To keep banging on this particular drum, Tom Hanks would take this girl to a carnival, or walk around the mall, or eat in a diner, or go to a basketball game, or the zoo, or an art museum, or to mini golf. Presumably, this is because David is trying to show her the beauty of the natural world, which is why they're, walking around downtown Denver at night. I don't think they mention the location in the movie, but that's where it was filmed. It's also implied that Tommy opens up to him somewhat about her crappy home life. So he puts this idea in her head about how much fun it would be to run away for a little while to this cabin on a property out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, where it's quiet, still, and free and beautiful. And of course, this is everything Tommy could possibly want. I also want to mention that if we call back to that earlier scene where David is talking to his girlfriend and fantasizing about going away together, this makes it even more of a red flag for me and just makes me think of David as someone whose instinct is to run away from his life or his problems rather than staying where he is and trying to improve his situation. And the idea of this is what we do, which is just a shorthand way of normalizing what is actually pretty unusual behavior. Like, this is what we do. This is just who we are. This is our typical thing. It's no big deal. It's not weird for us to do this. And there's a scene where David says to Tommy as they're walking along the city street alone at night, maybe this should be the last time we hang out. And she says, why? Because it's weird? And he says, yeah, because it's weird. I mean, I want to be glad that you're calling it out, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Lampshading this particular issue isn't going to make it suddenly okay. And that's the point at which we see Tommy go home to her mom and stepdad, who are sitting on the couch in the dark, getting drunk and watching TV. They barely look up when she comes in, and when she tries to talk to them, they blow her off and send her to her room. I just wanted to see, at this point in the movie, I do feel like there's a universe in which it could have been a touching, unlikely buddy comedy road trip movie. Something like Fundamentals of Caring with Paul Rudd, or that Jason Mantzoukas movie, The Long Dumb Road. But somehow the combination of preteen girl and middle-aged man is less prone to fun shenanigans than the teenage boy middle-aged man variety. And it's really hard to see past that. The next big act in the movie is when we actually get to the trip. We see a morning with Tommy standing at a bus stop when David pulls up to her in his car and suggests that instead of taking her to school, they play hooky together. Tommy agrees easily and he says, "So you've done this before? I'm not corrupting you?" Gross. So gross. Tell me how you say a thing like that if you're not a pedophile. He talks to her like he's Humphrey Bogart, which I think kind of really sums up his character. He's got this nostalgic kind of misogyny that I really struggle with. Tom Hanks wouldn't do this. If he ever skipped school with her, it'd be to take her to vote or something, and she'd be back in school the next day with a note. And at this point, David gives her a gift, a yellow sweater he bought for her that she likes so much she doesn't even want to open it. And I find that very relatable. I still have candles that I don't want to light because I'm waiting for the right kind of special occasion. They, meaning David, hatch a plan to take this trip out to the mountains without letting anyone know or asking for permission.
Secret trip in your secret life. You finally did your camping trip.
For how long?
Just a week. Not even 2 Mondays. I'll bring you back before anyone starts to worry. But we're not going to tell anybody where we went. You'll have to swear to God.
Swear to God.
You promise?
I promise.
You want to leave now?
I don't have my stuff.
I'll buy you stuff.
We shouldn't even tell my mom. She might let me, but Jesse would never.
It should go without saying, but Tom Hanks would not do this. He just wouldn't. We've reached the point in the movie where I no longer see how you can possibly defend this man's actions. David says he'll have Tommy back before anyone starts to worry, and I just have such a hard time believing that. Even in Stand By Me, the boys have to plot how they're going to lie to their parents to explain where they'll be for a day or two, and most of their parents don't give a shit about them. Also, it was the 1950s when kids had pretty much free roaming capabilities anyway. Even if Tommy's mom is a total piece of shit, I just don't see any way that she's going more than one night without calling the cops. It's going to be a 2-day drive out there, but they check into a hotel right away, presumably because David is still kicked out of his own home. What's funny to me, and this has nothing to do with the movie itself, is that it was filmed in Denver and Laramie, Wyoming, which are just about 2 hours apart. I assume it's just verisimilitude for the sake of the plot, but I like to think David's just driving around in circles to make the trip take longer or to confuse Tommy about where they're going. And then there's this scene that I really hate, where David checks into the hotel, 2 beds, bless, with Tommy, and then tells her to stay put while he goes to buy them things for their trip. He leaves her some money on the nightstand for a cab ride home. We're not going to skip over the sex work symbolism there. And has a serious conversation with her about whether she wants to stay and go on this trip with him because it's going to look like a kidnapping. Incidentally, because that's what it is. It really doesn't matter if Tommy wants to go. She doesn't have the legal right to consent in this situation. Consider it statutory kidnapping if you need to, if that helps you wrap your brain around why it's wrong. If a clown offers you candy in the back of his van, it's still kidnapping if he drives off with you in it, even though you got in on your own because you wanted the candy. Tommy wants the candy. She wants this fantasy that David is selling her. She doesn't know what she's actually buying. And he tells her that if she decides she wants to stay, that while he's gone shopping, she should make herself at home and get comfortable. That way, when he gets back, it's like she's inviting him into her room. And then they talk about how if she wants to leave at some point later, she can totally do that because they're equal partners, remember? I hate this so much. It's not equal partners if one of you can ground the other. She's 11 years old. She can't even get her own library card. She needs someone to sign a permission slip for her to learn about periods in health class. But sure. Yeah, now she's an equal partner in what I imagine is a felony, especially if they're crossing state lines. Yeah, that makes sense. Also, while he's gone buying them stuff for their trip, he meets up with his girlfriend and tells her that he's going away to his dad's cabin for a couple weeks, which is definitely not what he told Tommy. So I don't like that either. I wanted to bring this up just to make a connection, and this seems like the best part, while Tommy is getting settled into their hotel room. It's a tangent, but I promise I'm going somewhere. Are you familiar with Degrassi, The Next Generation? So basically, it's a Canadian teen drama show that started in the early 2000s. It follows some of the students at this particular high school in Canada. They're the kids or the next generation of the students from the original series in the 80s. And it's famous for covering a lot of really controversial topics like eating disorders, abortion, sexual assault, etc. Anyway, in the first episode, which came out in 2002, we follow one of our anchor characters, Emma. She's maybe 13. She's a sort of nerdy academic type, well-behaved, and an environmental activist. She has an online boyfriend named Jordan, who's a kid her age, who's also really big into the environment, and they've bonded over that kind of stuff. So one day, Jordan is coming to town with his environmental club, and he suggests to Emma that they should try to meet up. Her friends try to tell her it's a dumb idea because she doesn't know anything about this person, but she's like, nah, it'll be fine. And she goes to the hotel where he's staying on her own. She runs into this older guy in the lobby, whose birth date is not listed online, but he's maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, who's like, oh, hey, I'm Jordan's teacher. I'm in charge of the environmental club. You should come upstairs with me and we'll all share this single pizza and soda. And she does, because she believes him. But there's a point at which she realizes that there is no Jordan, and this dude is who she's been talking to online the whole time. And there's this kind of sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach at realizing that this is actually happening. So she goes to hide in the bathroom, and when she tries to get out, he threatens to tape her mouth shut. And then he starts recording them on the bed together, sniffing her hair and touching her lips. And certainly for me, watching that episode when it originally came out, I was around the same age, I felt that very deeply. It was like, oh no, this could be about me. And it's just devastating to realize that you're part of the world in that way. Because up to that point in your life, if you're Tommy or Emma, you've had this kind of naive optimism. You know, maybe it's privilege, as you get the sense that maybe Emma has never had anything really bad happen in her life. And maybe for Tommy, it's more that her life has been so crappy so far that it's about time something could happen to her. Like the universe owes her that. But mostly it's just that as a kid, you assume that good things should happen and that really, truly bad things only happen to other people. In the shows, the movies that you've watched, there's always some last minute save from a hero. In Emma's case, her mom and principal. So when you're deep into the situation and you have no idea how you're going to get out of it, that's something that you're not emotionally prepared to handle. Obviously, their situations aren't exactly the same, but that was definitely something that I thought of when I was watching this. With Tommy, once she goes away with David, there's this kind of finality to it. Like she's taking a really big step that from this point on, there's no easy way out of this. One of the ways that the film gets complicated is just on the subject of Tommy's agency. On the surface, it seems like she has choices. She chooses to go with David. She accepts his gifts. She plays along with his lies. Repeatedly, he tells her that they should stop seeing each other because it's weird and gives her opportunities to leave. But each time she insists. But she's a child. She doesn't understand the stakes of the situation. Any agency she ostensibly has is framed entirely within David's manipulation. It's only whatever choice he allows her. And that's part of what's so chilling to me about their whole situation. She's not shown as a pure victim, in constant terror of what's happening to her, always crying and begging and cowering in the corner and having to be pushed and forced to comply. She's portrayed as a child, optimistically, naively looking for connection, too young to see the danger she's walking into. She's wrapped up in this fantasy of what David is offering her. I do think societally for young girls, there's absolutely this pervasive romantic idea that the dream is for a charming older man to come in, sweep you off your feet, and give you the life you always dreamed of. That's the Disney promise, right? So we can't fault her for believing in this or for wanting to believe in this and for getting in over her head. If David had said to Tommy, let's rob a bank and then use all the money to buy a big house and a bunch of ponies and you'll never have to worry about anything ever again, I could see her getting wrapped up in that fantasy just as easily. Side note, we should definitely watch Pups at some point. But as an 11-year-old, she simply does not have the mental and emotional framework to be able to grasp the gravity and the reality of what he's inviting her into. And that gap between what Tommy understands at this age and what we understand of the situation as the audience is where the real horror of the movie lies. So this is the point in the show where we're going to talk a lot about grooming. And this part is probably going to get uncomfortable, but it is so important to talk about this in this context because it really comes back to the idea of the alleged ambiguity in this movie and whether or not David actually did anything wrong. And I want it to be clear that as far as I'm concerned, he did. Grooming is a word that gets thrown around a lot these days in ways that I'm not a fan of, but as it applies here, it's basically a pattern of behaviors that might seem innocuous on the surface or on their own or at first, but are meant to slowly train and adapt a victim into being more susceptible to whatever the next step is toward an end goal of abusing them. It reshapes their expectations of what a relationship is supposed to be like and creates a dependency on the abuser. It's incremental. It's disguised as care and affection, and it's intended to make the victim complicit in their own abuse, or at least to feel like they are. Grooming behaviors are often circumstantial. Someone who does one of these things might not be doing it in an untoward way, but they often pile up into a pretty unsavory picture. For child predators and abusers of many kinds, isolating the victim from their friends and family is a big grooming behavior. David immediately alienates Tommy from her friends, telling her that they don't really like her and she shouldn't hang out with them anymore. And when he finds out about the problems she has at home, he starts taking her out on her own to spend time alone with him. He's positioned himself as her only resource, the only person in her life who actually cares about her and wants what's best for her. So if she's looking for a way out, he becomes the only path for her. Alternatively, a non-predatory way to help Tommy might be to help or encourage her to get involved in some kind of club or after-school activity where she can meet other kids her age, or even get involved with like a Big Brothers Big Sisters type organization where she could have a positive adult influence. Taking someone else's minor child without their parents' permission around in your car and buying them food and gifts is generally frowned upon as a way of helping. And this other thing that we've touched on that's just so incredibly insidious that it just, I can't even handle it, is the way that he treats her like a peer, but both as a child and an adult. In some ways, Tommy feels like an adult because she's having to deal with grown-up problems and take care of herself, and in some ways she still feels like a child. And David positions himself in the same way. Ostensibly he's an adult, but in some ways he feels like a child because he has these simple needs and ideas about wanting to go out in the woods and be free and peaceful, and also his somewhat reckless impulsiveness. Adults don't usually just make the decision to take off for a week and go sit in the woods. But this behavior is a thing that pedophiles do. It's a way of putting them on the same level, to level the playing field so that other interactions they have that would be seen as weird or inappropriate in an age gap situation become normal and fine because they're both the same, see? So if they share a hotel room, it's not weird because they're both not kids, not adults. And maybe at some point in the future, if they were to do things that boyfriends and girlfriends or husbands and wives do, that's also fine because they're the same. If you can't tell, there's a lot of sarcasm going on here because this concept really pisses me off. There was someone in a Reddit thread that I looked at who said, she's not wise beyond her years and he's not a child at heart, and their relationship, whatever shape that takes, cannot be reciprocal. It reminds me of when adults used to say I was an old soul as a kid. No, you just don't understand neurodivergence. I'm anxious and traumatized, Sharon. Let's not romanticize it. Adults have to have boundaries when working with kids. You can be friendly with them, but you also have to sometimes acknowledge that there is a power dynamic. But when David does this, it's not in a caring way, it's as an authoritarian. It reminds me of how you teach kids about stranger danger, and you tell them that if a grown-up ever comes to them asking for help, that they need to get away because grown-ups don't need help from children. In what situation are there adults out there seeking out children for help or friendship who don't have ulterior motive? It's just one of those tactics to put them on the same level so that anything else they ask from the child seems normal and okay. And that's exactly what David does. He casts himself as needing Tommy's wisdom, her care, her friendship, when in reality, he's an adult, leveraging her trust in him for his own purposes. He can act like he and Tommy are friends and, that they're just pals for a while, but when a decision has to be made, of course he's the one making it because he's the adult. Of course she has to listen to him because he's the adult. Of course, if Tommy wants to go home or she wants to call her mom or she wants to cry to some nice lady in the parking lot of a gas station, she's just not thinking about it correctly because she's just a child. And so as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter how pure David's intentions are or how pure he believes them to be. At the end of the day, he's still able to put his foot down and be an authority figure, and he doesn't just get to act like he's not the rest of the time. He comes back to this line a few times about calling them equal partners, which they in no way are. And I'm sorry, you don't just get to erase the power imbalance when it suits you. She doesn't even have a learner's permit. How would this be equal? At best, she's allowed to pick the road trip playlist. David also pulls the classic pedo move of, well, we wouldn't want to tell anyone about our super secret special friendship because they wouldn't understand and they'd get mad and not let us hang out anymore, and you might get in trouble. And I might get in trouble, as if those levels of trouble are anywhere near the same. Let's not equate the apples of getting grounded for 2 weeks with the oranges of going to prison for 5 to 10 years, David. Perhaps it should go without saying, but convincing children to keep secrets from their parents is also a thing that'll get you put on a list. That's another one of those things that you teach kids about safety. If any adult asks you to keep something a secret from your parents, and it's not like a birthday present or something, you let your parents know. And David does this super manipulative thing that I fucking hate, where Tommy will try to back out of something in one way or another, and he'll pretend to give in, and then he'll either frame that action so it seems like a bad thing and forces her to reconsider, like, do you really want to do that? You might get in trouble or make things worse. Or he'll just flat out change the subject to either make her forget about it or to get her to change her mind. My notes just say, I hate this. Very professional. But it's so dismissive and it pisses me off so much because it's that garbage idea of plausible deniability, where he could still say, oh, I didn't tell her she couldn't do it. I just pointed out the potential consequences and she made the decision herself. Or she brought it up once, but then she didn't say anything about it after that. And it's missing the context and the nuance and the pressure of that power dynamic. David crosses boundary after boundary. He isolates Tommy from her friends and family. He buys her gifts. He frames their relationship as special and unique, making her complicit in keeping their secrets. There's this other classic pedo move he pulls, which is that when they're in the car, he asks her if she's ever had a boyfriend and asks her about if she's ever hooked up with anyone. And he gets super serious about this. He pulls off the road, makes eye contact with her, and repeats the question to her because it's very serious. Again, she's fucking 11. It's one thing to ask her if she has a crush on anyone or if she's had a boyfriend, just as a way to make conversation or to connect with her. It's not great, and it does remind me of those old clips you see from TV shows in the 60s and 70s where some old man host will put a mic in front of a prepubescent girl and ask her if she has a boyfriend and if she'd like to have him as a boyfriend and force her to give him a kiss on the cheek. We don't openly sexualize young children quite the same way that we used to, unless you're the president. But specifically interrogating her about whether she's hooked up with anyone, which, honestly, what the fuck does that even mean to an 11-year-old anyway, is a very predatory move. A big grooming thing is to normalize being really casual about an environment of sexuality. A predator might talk to someone they're targeting about their own sexual exploits or feelings and how normal and healthy it is. They might ask them if they masturbate or how they masturbate and how normal and healthy it is, or how fun it is and how good it can feel. They might not take the normal amount of care or intentionally make a point to have sex, masturbate, or leave pornography around where the child will be bound to see it. They might show them pornography as a joke or in the background or just to check it out. These things all create a pattern that is meant to open the door for actual sexual contact. Also, at one point she's eating a ring pop in the car next to him, and I imagine that had to be an intentionally suggestive choice. It's just a stereotype at this point, like creepy old men watching girls eat lollipops. Come on, man, just let a girl eat some Nerds gummy clusters or something. And then she says, "I know it's not just for 1 week. I know you had to say that or we would have never left." And he doesn't correct her. God, I hate this man so fucking much. Every time he opens his mouth, I just want to stab him with forks. I have so many notes that are just writing down whole quotes of his because it's like every single thing he says is so unbelievably slimy. And I think that's my biggest problem with him. Not as a character, because I do think he's well written, but as a person, is that every line he delivers is so incredibly dramatic, like he's trying to be dark and mysterious and quotable. And it just comes off incredibly cringy. This man is absolutely incapable of small talk. He can only speak cryptically and profoundly. I can see how it might be impressive to a child, but as an adult, it's genuinely just terrible.
Imagine being a truck driver. Seeing a man like me, and a girl like you, talking about things. What do you think that they would think?
I guess I would think some guy and his kid.
If they were to ask you, you'd be able to look them in the eyes and tell them that's what we are?
Sure.
Okay.
And I didn't clip it, but then a little bit later he says, "You're the kind of girl who deserves someone to turn down the bed for you every night." I also love that Tommy doesn't really respond in kind. So you can tell it's not like, oh, this movie is just written really badly. It's this man is writing his own movie very badly. Like, he absolutely thinks he's the main character in his own movie. And he is unfortunately interacting with an actual 11-year-old girl who's just like, yeah, I guess, whatever. And then they have this weird conversation before bed one night, separate beds again, I promise, where he talks about how they're like brother and sister, and he's the younger, smaller brother, and she's the older and smarter sister who's going to teach him about all the beautiful things he needs to know. He's pretending to submit power to Tommy and telling her that he needs her. But it's a fiction. Of course, this doesn't change anything about their actual power dynamic. It's just that groomer thing of putting them on the same level, but pushed even further to where now she's older and teaching him things. She's just so mature and he has so much to learn from her. You can tell that he's lonely, and that it's this sense of loneliness and longing that are coming together in this moment. He wants to be small, to be comforted and nurtured by someone. It's mentioned in passing in the first scene with his dad that his mom ran off a long time ago, and you could see that he's seeking out that kind of connection with someone, which is fine, except he's talking to a literal child. Instead of seeking out an adult peer, dating a plus-size goth mommy like a normal human being, he projects this need onto Tommy, who is 100% not equipped to do anything about it. She can't save him. Do we think that any of this is intentional? We know that David can lie and be manipulative. Is it possible that he's saying this because he knows it will make his dependency look poetic instead of exploitative? Either to Tommy or to the outside world. Like I said, David very clearly is someone who feels like he's the main character in his own movie. Is he trying to write that movie here and trying to make it seem better from the outside? This way of telling Tommy that she's older and smarter is a way of flattering her and making it sound like their relationship, I hate calling it that, is her idea or something that she's in control of, when in reality it never is. Because again, I cannot emphasize this enough, she is a child. Directly after this, she tells him she might want to call her mom and tell her she's okay. And he 100% tries to talk her out of it without saying no. He asks if she thinks that maybe her mom will worry more if Tommy calls her, and says maybe she should think about that. It's like how you talk to a toddler when you're like, I know you want to wear your Batman costume to the grocery store, but don't you think Batman would want to keep his identity secret? It's bad logic that doesn't actually go anywhere. Please explain to me, David, how and why would it make her mom worry more if she knows where Tommy is and that she's okay? The scene ends there, implying that of course she's never able to make that call. There's a scene at a truck stop where Tommy is crying at a picnic table and a mom walks up to her and asks her if she's okay. Tommy tells the woman her name is Emily, and then David hurries in and scoops her up, telling the woman she's fine, she's just car sick. David then has another one of those conversations with her where he makes sure she's got the narrative straight. She's just taking a little trip, she wants to be there, they're only there for a few days, and then he's going to take her home. Everything is fine. And then there's the fucking bathtub scene. Okay, I don't want to have to talk about this, but we do. So basically what happens is that while Tommy is ready for bed one night in the hotel, separate beds still, I'm going to insist on clarifying, while she's turning over talking about how tired she is, David accidentally spills hot coffee on Tommy, and then really aggressively and uncomfortably insists that he help her get in the bath to wash off and cool down. And no matter how much she resists, he physically carries her into the bathroom, busting her lip in the process. And he pressures her and refuses to leave the bathroom even when the curtain is drawn over the tub, telling her to take her shirt off while she's crying, which she does, and yells at him to go away. And he turns on the water. She's curled up in the bathtub, sobbing and saying she wants to go home, and he just sits there shushing her. Almost every article and review that I read mentioned this scene. It's really the climax of the movie for me, and it's not even 45 minutes in. This was the scene that really fucked me up, because there's only so far you can go to defend your intentions when you're insisting that a child bathe in front of you. The movie has even made it a point to establish that they have a routine for when she bathes. He leaves the hotel room, counts to whatever number, and then asks to make sure she's dressed and ready before he comes back in. So why now would he refuse to leave even the bathroom and insist that she take off her shirt? It just doesn't track with an innocent explanation. The power dynamic in this scene is so far off balance. The control that he has and the control that he wants is so stark. I just don't see how anyone can see it as innocent. The film doesn't let you look away from the raw emotions coming from both of them in this moment. Because we don't really have any kind of interiority with Tommy, we can't know exactly what she's thinking. But how I see it is that she's juggling a lot right now, mentally. And there's definitely a part of her that suspects what David might really be after. She is young, but she's not totally oblivious, and she would be aware that things don't feel totally right. But I think primarily she wants everything to be okay because she wants a friend. She's so desperate for someone to be nice to her and to like her for who she is that she's willing to ignore the red flags that jump out at the audience, in the same way that she was hanging out with her friends at the beginning of the movie who didn't really like her. So there's this cognitive dissonance in this scene where it's hard to ignore what David is trying to do, but she's not really capable of addressing it. She's just this preteen girl, and given her home life, there's no way she's been raised to talk about her feelings or to discuss problems that she's having in any kind of a mature and rational way. And the reason that the friendship with David is so complicated and tricky is that on the one hand, he's treating her like a peer, like they're equals, and they can relate to each other. They both have similar problems and wants, and he's probably the only person to have ever really made her feel seen and understood. But on the other hand, he's treating her like a child in that he's offering her this blissful childhood experience, which is something she also really wants and needs. And yet, he's also treating her like a much younger child than what she is. She even says to him in the scene just after this, "I'm not a little kid. You treat me like I'm 5. I don't need any fucking baths." And I love that for her. And there's absolutely this power dynamic because of that, where sure, we're just buddies doing buddy things, but then also I'm the adult and I'm the only one who can drive and who has the money and who knows where we're going, and ultimately I'm in charge of everything. And given Tommy's home life, there's going to be enough residual wariness of authority figures that she's not going to feel like she can stand up to him the way that she might if she was with a kid her own age. So in this scene, she doesn't really know what to do, because of course she doesn't want to be right about what David might be trying to do, but what if she's wrong? She may not even have the vocabulary to explain what she thinks is happening. What if she accused him of something and that made him mad enough to stop pretending to be nice? And then whatever he'd been leading up to, he gave up and just did it suddenly. Or what if she accused him of something that wasn't true and then that made him mad and he hurt her anyway? Or what if she accused him of something, it wasn't true, and then he didn't want to be her friend anymore, and now she's ruined the one good friendship with someone who is actually trying to make her life better? She can't reconcile all these options, but she can't bring herself to just go along with whatever he's trying to do. I do want to mention, though, that the next scene is them in the car together, and I've never seen someone so perfectly encapsulate looking at another person with absolute contempt as this girl manages. No notes, 10 out of 10, this girl is the face of seething hatred. And that's all before they even get to the cabin, which is kind of where the movie lost me. The first thing that bugs me about the cabin is that when they first walk in, David points Tommy to a paper-wrapped package on a bunk bed, and it turns out to be a white, flowy cotton dress for her that looks like something a ghost would wear. This will be relevant later. It was a 2-day drive for them to get there, and this wasn't like an Amazon package, so that means that he would have had to come up here at some other time and drop it off. I'm not saying it's a plot hole, I'm saying it's weird behavior, and it points to a lot of planning on David's part. They get to have their nice time out in nature with Tommy and her new dress, and they get to play in the river, and they even run into a creepy old neighbor who seems to have wandered in from the set of the horror movie I thought this was going to be. And David tells Tommy later that he's worried about the old guy peeking in the windows, so they should only use lanterns and candles. And then they slow dance in the kitchen. Just so we're clear, I hate this. They also share bites of an apple at some point, and that's just super gross to me. Not like sexually or anything, just in general. I can't think of a single time in my life that I've done that with anyone. It feels way too intimate. Another thing I hate, in that same scene, David is telling Tommy how beautiful she is, and he says, "You are whole." And I just think of that TikTok sound that goes, "What an odd thing to say." The creepy old neighbor walks in on Tommy grabbing a sip of David's beer, and David again sweeps in and pushes her out of the room, yelling at her and telling her she's in trouble. He might hit her, I don't remember, and I didn't want to go back and check. Tommy is of course crying about this, and David tries to calm her down, saying that he had to react that way to keep up appearances. Otherwise, he could get in big, big trouble. And he says, "How do you think they would react to that at home?" Which is again doing that thing where he tries to frame the consequences of him kidnapping her as being the same for both of them. Then, as David is sitting in his car at night, listening to a crime report on the radio, no, I don't know why, as it was established in a previous scene that they do have a radio in the kitchen, he sees headlights nearby and starts stapling tarps over the windows. He goes to spy on his creepy neighbor who's just taking care of his ill wife? Was there something from this scene that I'm not getting? And then the next day when they're out in the field, they see a car driving down the long driveway, and David immediately recognizes it as his girlfriend's car. He makes Tommy run and tells her that she has to be totally quiet in the other room so that nobody knows she's here. The girlfriend says, "It's so nice to be back here." So I guess he's taken her here before, which really makes me wonder how long it's been since his dad died. I was thinking weeks or months. Am I misunderstanding, or did his dad not live in this cabin until he died? I could have rewatched the movie, but again, I did not want to. Things are understandably awkward between David and his girlfriend, and he tries to tell her that he's just not in a great mental place. He also says at one point, "I'm afraid I make everybody say everything." So on some level, he's aware that he's manipulative. We see him climb into the bunk bed with Tommy so they can have a little chat, where he explains that he doesn't actually love his girlfriend, that he's only doing this for him and Tommy, so the girlfriend doesn't get suspicious and get them in trouble. And then he takes her to the bathroom and is cuddling her outside. He tells her something he's never told anyone else. His little brother disappeared when he was roughly Tommy's age, and they never found out what happened to him. That his brother used to run away because their house was a sad place, and one time he just never came back. He makes her promise that she'll always call him Gary. Do you think this story is true? Who fucking knows? There are no facts in this movie. The next morning, he brings Tommy a secret breakfast and tells her the girlfriend will be leaving soon. Tommy angrily and jealously watches them having fun swimming in the river and pouts alone in her room because now she's being excluded. To keep his girlfriend from going into the room where Tommy is hiding, he tells her that it's haunted by the ghost of a young girl named Emily. This is my favorite part of the movie somehow. I can't believe the ease with which David spins this fucking yarn of a tale about a little girl who used to live in the house, how she disappeared and her family never found out what happened to her, and that he's had conversations with this little ghost girl who says she's in love with him and wants to live here with him forever. It's so fitting. It's so perfect. It keeps his girlfriend out of that room. It helps explain any kind of spooky noises they might hear. It gives a reason why he's so uncomfortable, and it sets up the possibility that at some point we might have a spooky ghost sighting, and it incorporates the fake name that Tommy used. It really seems like he just pulled the story entirely out of his ass, and I find that fascinating. This is intercut with what should be the climax of the movie, where we have scenes of Tommy finally getting out and running off to the creepy neighbor's house. We hope to tell him what happened and help her get away, presumably getting discouraged for some reason that definitely was not clear to me, leaving without actually knocking on the door or anything, and then returning to look in through the cabin window as David and his girlfriend have sex on the living room floor and making the world's most uncomfortable eye contact with him through the window while that happens. And this is where the end of the movie gets really rushed, in my opinion. The next morning, we see Tommy in her gifted white dress, vomiting for unknown reasons, as a white car drives down the driveway. She runs back into the house and quietly watches the happy couple sleeping before saying, "Gary?" The girlfriend, who I gotta think believes she's seeing a fucking ghost, immediately wakes David up, and he goes into full panic mode, scoops Tommy away, saying she's his niece and she's been sick, and telling the girlfriend that he's finally ready to open up to her. Tommy, of course, is furious and throws things at him, yelling, "I hate you, I'm just a kid to you." The girlfriend finally leaves, and then Tommy and David have this really emotional conversation about him finally taking her home, where he makes her promise she won't tell anyone where she was. He dedicates a fence post to her and tells her they're equal partners and that he wills this cabin to her and all this Humphrey Bogart bullshit. You just have to listen to this.
You'll move here long after I'm gone. And I will write you a half-dozen letters like this one here. Every single day for the rest of my life. And they will tell the story of my love for you. Messages from the dead.
It's so melodramatic. So he does actually drive Tommy back, and we see her in the car at night clutching the sweater that David bought her and a bottle of cold medicine. They stay at another hotel, and he says a thing we'll talk about in a minute, and then sobs while she holds him while wearing a towel, which I definitely don't like. So 2 things I wanted to flag here. Thing 1 is that allegedly it's a 2-day drive, but when they're on the way out to the cabin, we only see them driving during the day, and then when they're on the way back, we only see them driving at night. I feel like this is just a stylistic choice about like how happy and optimistic everything was on the way there, but now everything feels much darker. And the second thing is that this is the only time we see them sharing a bed in a hotel room, but when they're talking, Tommy says they've been at this hotel before. And then there's this awful scene when David is getting ready to drop Tommy off at night and she's crying. And this is going to be a long clip, sorry.
Maybe.
What, sweetheart?
Maybe we can help everyone. I think they would understand. Because it's love, right?
Oh, sweetheart. Remember what we said about keeping each other safe?
Yes.
Can you stop crying?
I'm trying.
Okay. Love like ours is expensive, right? Think of it that way. We pay for it by not seeing each other.
Couldn't we just go get a coffee or something?
I'm sorry, sweetheart. This is the last chapter.
And then a few lines later, he says to her, "Don't ever forget this hurt. Don't ever forget the things that we've seen together, because it will save you." Blech. Finally, we see David drive off and Tommy running down the sidewalk after him, continuing to cry. And that's where this movie ends. So that was the movie. What makes this movie disturbing? For me, it's also what's fascinating about it is that it forces us to witness David's humanity, even as we recoil from him. We see his loneliness, his yearning for connection, his internal guilt boiling over, and yet none of that excuses what he's doing. As the story goes on, we see him unraveling. He's caught in between the image of himself as a protector and also the reality of his actions. He has this intense paternal longing that curdles into guilt and denial. We see him go through this cycle where he lashes out, he retreats, he weeps. And this is where the movie really pushes you to draw the line between safe and unsafe empathy. Do you empathize with David's pain, his grief, his longing? Do you let that empathy cloud your judgment about the harm he's inflicting? There was a really great article I read on Father, Son, Holy Gore that I thought summed up something that none of the others I read did.
People want to debate whether he did anything sexual to Tommy. Sure, you can definitely consider it a debatable topic. However, my offer of proof is David's breakdown later when he says, "If you discover that one day you hate me and you're angry with me and that I've ruined your life, at any time, if I'm 90, you'll tell me, won't you?" He gets even worse, more angry toward himself in that scene. To me, and this is merely personal opinion, David has admitted right there and then that something not right has occurred. Now maybe that's not sexual, maybe he just feels the boundaries were pushed too far in general. Not sure, but something certainly happened, whether it's simply the overall tone of their relationship or something further than what we saw on screen went down, who knows. There's just something about that speech from David, the emotion in him, which really says he's done a bad thing. Plenty of his previous behavior already speaks to that. This later moment is probably the most overt of them all. Perhaps, above all else, David/Gary's exertion of control and power over young Tommy is due to his narcissism. He may not be a pedophile at all. He could simply be the loneliest man on earth, driven to, essentially, kidnapping a child just to reassure himself, just to have someone to love him, to make someone love him. After his life collapsed, he needed something, anything. Whether he was sexual with her is up for debate, but either way, his disregard for Tommy's feelings and her innocence and childhood is horrific.
That line of David's about, "You'd tell me if I ruined your life, wouldn't you?" just reeks of narcissism to me. It's like the reaction you get from a narcissist when you've confronted them with some way that they've hurt you, and they can't deny it, so they jump to, "Oh my God, I'm the worst person ever. You must hate me. I'm such an asshole." Which is really just an attempt to turn the tables on you and have you reassure them that they're not the worst person ever, you don't hate them, actually what they did wasn't that bad, and you're sorry that you overreacted, you're sorry that it bothered you, you're not really mad at them at all. It's a way to make the situation about them and to lead to you apologizing to them first so they can say that they forgive you. I have no doubt that David is using Tommy. Even if it isn't in the front of his mind that she's a target for sexual abuse, it can still be true that the ways he's treating her, the situations he's putting her in, are inappropriate and predatory. Even if he's just using her as some misguided attempt at healing his inner child or at escaping the downward spiral of his life or feeling something in the depths of his depression, those are excuses, not reason. But I also want to make something very clear. There's a lot of this debate over whether the relationship between David and Tommy was sexual or not, and let me just say, having a romantic relationship with a child is not morally defensible, even if you don't have sexual contact with them. We can't act like this is a totally fine situation if everyone kept their clothes on. Romance implies consent, equality, and autonomy, all things that Tommy is not capable of giving. So even without sex, the act of treating her as a romantic partner is inherently exploitative and also just super fucking gross. This is not the honor roll. You don't get a gold star for not molesting the child you kidnapped. There are a few movies that I can think of where I felt like I desperately want to know what happened in between the scenes that we saw. You know what I mean? The movie, like most movies, is framed in such a way that we're meant to believe that all of the interesting and relevant stuff happened on screen. But David himself is such an unreliable character that it makes me wonder if what we're seeing is just filtered through the lens of his interpretation of events. Like I said, he's somebody who sees himself as the main character, so is this just his movie? It's so pointed to me sometimes that we're not seeing the whole picture. Even from early on, when David's boss is talking about him fucking something up at work, we never see that happen or hear him talk about it to anyone else. When Tommy tells the woman in the parking lot that her name is Emily, is she coming up with that on the spot? Or is it more likely that David told her she needs to have some kind of a fake name to go along with their story, and we just never saw that happen? Did David's younger brother actually go missing and die? Or is that just a story he tells Tommy to put it in her head that that's what happens to people who run away? There's a scene where Tommy yells at David that she hates it here at the cabin and he promised her there would be horses. I don't remember him saying that to her, so I can only imagine how many more scenes we never saw of him building this place and this experience up in her mind. There are barely any scenes where we see Tommy on her own, at least not for very long. Most often she's doing something alone for a moment or having an interaction with someone else, and David rushes in and whisks her away or pushes her off. Once David's girlfriend shows up, there are more scenes of Tommy alone, but even in these, she's mostly listening to David or watching him. In fact, the only scenes she's really alone in after they meet are the weird non-dialogue scene where she's shaving her legs and the one near the end where she tries to run away. There's a part of me that wonders if maybe we're not seeing the whole picture and there are missing scenes that don't exist where David does do more overtly terrible things. And there's a particularly awful instinct that sees Tommy throw up in the morning with no real explanation and immediately jumps to the conclusion that she must be pregnant. Do I genuinely think that's the case? No, but fuck this movie for putting me in the headspace where I could even imagine that possibility. The other thing we don't see in this movie is what's going on at home. How long did it take for Tommy's parents to start to worry about her until they report her missing? Is there a manhunt going on, or do they think she's a runaway? It's an intentional omission because it keeps us focused and present in the beautiful world that David is building, and not on seeing the cops looking through Tommy's empty bedroom and remembering, oh, right, this is a crime that's happening. We talked a lot about the bathtub scene, and that quote about how debatable it is whether or not David actually did anything sexual toward Tommy. And something that I'd like to talk about here, which I didn't see in any of the articles and reviews that I read, probably for the reason that it's uncomfortable to talk about, is that I think after that scene, which is pretty much the halfway mark in the movie, is a big turning point. Not just for David, but it also feels to me like a big shift in Tommy's mental state. I would like to suggest that this is the point where Tommy kind of accepts and commits to this idea of being in a romantic relationship with David. It's part Stockholm Syndrome, part naive child. Like I said earlier, I think Tommy is bought into this Disney dream of being rescued from her miserable life by a charming older man who wants to take care of her and show her a better world. She was wrapped up in the fantasy and adventure of it. She gets this fun camping trip and to be treated like she's special, which is something she deeply wants. But because of the life she's had so far, there's a part of her that understands that relationships aren't all positivity, that men are often mean and cruel, and that there are things and behaviors you just have to accept and go along with, even if you don't like them, because you're young and a woman, and that's just how the world works. At 11, if an adult tells you that you're equal partners, you want to believe them. I know at that age I was desperate for adults to take me seriously. But the truth is that you're not a partner. You're a kid. And kids deserve to be kids. Before this point, it's been a largely chaste but flirty relationship. And maybe she believed that was as far as it needed to go. That they were already boyfriend and girlfriend in whatever terrible way. I know that every time I've dated someone, I immediately map out what I think the rest of our lives together would look like. And I imagine that's where Tommy is. She sees David as a distinct possibility of the rest of her life, or at least the rest of his, because she can't really fathom the future. But then, at some point between the bathtub scene and I would say that first night at the cabin where they slow dance in the kitchen, it seems to me as if her expectations have changed. She shows signs of internalizing a more adult understanding. Intimacy isn't just sweet gestures and safety. Sometimes it's invasive, uncomfortable, painful, scary. And she accepts that because it lines up with her experience of the world so far, and because she doesn't want to lose David. And this echoes what many survivors of grooming relationships describe, that moment when affection and violation collapse into each other. The bathtub scene is the last time that we're really allowed to wonder if maybe David has done something to cross the line. After that, it seems to me like the movie is deliberately withholding information. We don't see every moment between them, which creates unease. Just because we're not seeing it doesn't mean it's not happening. The film gives us just enough to suggest that something more might be going on, and then leaves us to wrestle with it. Tucking Tommy into her bed on that first night is the first time we see them exchange I love yous. David says it first, and Tommy echoes it back. It's her way of agreeing to this framing of their bond, even if she doesn't fully understand what that means. I want to talk about a few problems I have with the movie, aside from the general subject. One of my pet peeves with a movie is when it tries to do two things at once and ends up not doing either of them well. This movie is slightly different in that I think it could have gone in two different directions, but it split the difference and kind of ended up nowhere. Direction number one is for it to be a horror movie, like I thought it was heading toward. And honestly, I think that's very easy to accomplish. What you do is, once you're at the cabin, you have Tommy find some kind of evidence that David has brought other girls here before and hurt them, or even that his father used to bring girls here when he was a young man, or even when David was a kid and had him involved. Like, I'm picturing Tommy finding pictures of David as a young boy, each time with a different young girl, posed awkwardly and holding hands or doing something mildly suggestive, or maybe even a home video where his dad is shown, like, putting them into place and telling them to kiss. And she finds bloody clothing or a body or something, and that's when she freaks out and has to escape, and she's able to do that. I like the idea of her going to the creepy neighbor, and it turns out he's actually just a really nice guy who's been suspicious of David and David's father for a long time, and he's able to help her get away. Maybe he even kills David. I think it's fucked up, but it would have been a punchier ending than this, and I think when I thought this was a horror movie that I thought that's where it was going. Direction number 2, and this is obviously the more difficult one, is for it to be less ambiguous and have David actually make some kind of a move on Tommy. Like, he makes them an awkward candlelight dinner, and they giggle, and he says something about how they should pretend to be boyfriend and girlfriend, or husband and wife, and he tries to kiss her, or have her sleep in his bed with him, or something. And at some point, she decides to leave. To be clear, these are things that I 100% believe happened, but we just don't see those scenes. The way they interact, the way they talk about their love and their relationship, it's never like they're sitting down and talking about it for the first time, like, hey, let's figure this out. There are definitely conversations going on that we're not seeing. I understand why no one is comfortable making that movie, but I also think it's more emotionally effective. I think in mainstream cinema, you get taboo relationships handled in one of two ways. Either sensationalizing them to the point of melodrama, or by punishing the character so clearly that the audience feels safe and morally reassured. Going in the horror movie direction sets you up for brutal punishment and comeuppance, as the bad guy is ultimately killed by some righteous hero. Taking the unambiguous sexual abuse route and having David treat Tommy as a Lolita figure would certainly erase the ambiguity of the situation, but it would also paint David as a monster and make it harder to feel sympathy for his character. It's really only with indie films that you're able to explore this level of uncertainty, to kind of live in it, to let us as the audience sit in that unease without any kind of clear guardrails. I guess ultimately my problem is this, that I don't like morally ambiguous pedophiles. That's really the heart of what I believe makes this movie such an uncomfortable watch. The filmmakers were very intentional about not making anything explicit, not totally condemning or excusing David's behavior, never taking a moral stance on what he's doing and why. The whole point is to leave it ambiguous, and ultimately that's unsatisfying for me. What makes Lamb powerful and deeply uncomfortable is that it refuses to spell out the answer for you. David's character is well written in that he's absolutely infuriating. One thing I wanted to bring up was how there's so much of this plausible deniability that we talked about that you hear all the time from garbage MAPs online, or MAPs, I don't know what they call themselves and I don't care. For our listeners who may not know, these are pedophiles who believe that they have normal sexual proclivities and thus have adopted the label minor attracted persons because they feel like pedophile is too stigmatizing. Their whole thing is that there's nothing wrong with what they're doing because they're having loving relationships with children who are willingly romantically involved with them, ignoring the problems of power dynamics, consent, and underdeveloped brains. Another common narrative you see among those people and anyone who dates much younger partners is that the younger person is so mature for their age. And I think the movie leans into this idea pretty heavily as well. Tommy is shown as being wise beyond her years, very savvy for a preteen. Because she's neglected at home, she's on her own a lot and has to take care of herself in a lot of ways. And because she's had to deal with what is assumed to be some level of alcoholism and abuse at home. And we see several examples that suggest that Tommy is participating in the romantic dynamic between them. But for me, that's kind of bullshit because she is a literal child. I'm just going to keep saying it. This is a child that we're talking about. I don't care if she has a crush on this old dude. I don't care if she has confusing romantic feelings for him. I don't care if there's some level on which she feels like she wants to be with him. Whatever maturity has been forced upon her by her circumstances, she still has the mind and the body of a child, and she deserves to be treated as one. If an 11-year-old has seen some shit, should they suddenly be allowed to vote? No. So they also should not be allowed to consent to a romantic relationship with an adult. Because David doesn't do anything overt to Tommy, he gets to maintain this innocence and say that he's just befriending a neglected kid. Tommy's happy. Tommy wants to be here. He gave her every opportunity to back out. He told her that people might be mad if she left, and she came anyway. Obviously, she wants to be with him, and he's not forcing her to do anything. So what's the big deal? I'm pretty sure it's still kidnapping legally, but maybe it wouldn't go any further than that. And I guess what I struggle with on, like, an emotional level is just reconciling those ideas. That he can be a nice person who's not necessarily intending to hurt anyone, and also that his actions are fundamentally wrong and inappropriate. That he still has taken all of the necessary steps to groom a child into a romantic relationship, even if he believes that wasn't what he wanted. Some of the reviews and interviews I read were talking about how ultimately David is a good person and is not actually a pedophile. And that he never intended anything in a dirty way, and everything just looks really bad. And I just don't totally buy into that concept. I'm biased, of course, but I don't think you necessarily need that level of intent. Something that people talk about a lot with people who've been accused of inappropriate relationships with children is that, they're very sad people with a lot of psychological problems stemming from their own childhoods. And so all of the behaviors that they exhibit regarding children were ultimately innocent. And I just feel like that line of logic only gets you so far, right? At the end of the day, if you have a biologically grown adult acting inappropriately with a minor child, you do have to draw the line somewhere. If he were to get naked and bathe with children, that doesn't get to still be innocent and non-predatory. When one person is legally and psychologically capable of sexual consent and the other is not, the intent doesn't really matter, in my opinion. I've been in situations in my life with people who would have sworn up and down that they weren't abusive and never did anything wrong. And somehow it must have been a coincidence that they carried out all the steps that somebody would do if they were trying to abuse another person, like isolating me from my friends and family by talking bad about them and refusing to spend any time with them. Interacting with my friends and family on their own or on my behalf in such a way that they chose not to be around me or us, refusing to engage with my interests and hobbies and denigrating them or me for being interested in them, only wanting me to join them in the things they wanted to do, limiting my access to things outside the house, including medical care, refusing to help with any chores or household tasks but being controlling about how they're performed, controlling my access to money and resources for things like food, household goods, and personal care items, being unsupportive or unhelpful when it came to anything I wanted to do to improve myself or anything that would take me away from them, not respecting when I don't want to do something, whining and pleading and sulking when they don't get their way, being critical of anything that others would say I'm doing well, reluctant to give any kind of praise unless it's somehow serving them, and on and on and on. It doesn't matter how pure David's intentions are or how pure he thinks they are, because we see that he's capable of a great deal of lying to the people around him, and even to himself. I find him a very sympathetic character, for sure. I almost always sympathize with characters who have difficult relationships with their parents, because I know what that's like. And clearly there's a lot going on in his life, and he doesn't know how to deal with it, so he's reaching out for something simple and nostalgic and innocent. And I get that, but it doesn't make it okay. We also see that he's really quick at lying, so How much of his character can we really believe anyway? Something that was really interesting to me about the movie was that Ross Partridge wrote, directed, and starred in it. And I think the effectiveness of David's character comes down to that decision, because so much of it is a delicate balance. I can't imagine being a director and having to direct someone on exactly the subtle nuances of maybe kind of sort of being a pedophile, but not explicitly. It sounds both difficult and intensely uncomfortable, and I imagine at some point it was easier just to step in and do it himself. And that's basically what he said in this interview that I read. I really like the way he put it. He said, instead of a straight line, it would have been a triangle. And that just makes perfect sense to me. Like, you've got this very specific vision in mind for what needs to happen, and instead of having to translate that to another person, and then they have to translate that into a performance, you just go ahead and do the thing. He said that in order to play David well, to play him correctly, that David has to believe that he's not doing anything wrong, that he's just doing everything with love and coming from the right place. And I feel like that's true of playing any kind of villain character, that they really have to believe their own motivations and believe that they're not the bad guy. And he, Ross, not David, said that he asked the actress who played Tommy how she thought Tommy would handle things after the movie ended, and that she thought she'd just go home, probably take a shower, and go on with her life, that she wouldn't tell anyone about it. And I think he's interpreting this as, yeah, she'd be fine, it's not a big deal. But Una Lawrence was maybe 12 or 13 at the time. I don't think she can really give you a good insight into whether or not this is an experience that Tommy's character would internalize, if it's something that would ultimately be traumatic to her, how it might affect her future relationships and friendships. Lessons that you learn about trust as a child are hard to unlearn. And I think this time period in her life is going to linger in her psyche and probably show up in other ways in the future. I would speculate, if only through projection, that Tommy is likely to end up in other predatory situations with older boys and men who might be less subtle about whatever ill intentions they may have with her, whether that's next year or in high school or as an adult. This experience is now a part of her formative years, forming her views of what relationships are like, and I just don't see any way that it doesn't have a negative impact on that for her. Let's make some connections. So, like I said, the movie is based on a novel of the same name by Bonnie Nadzam. I have not read. The book takes place, as books tend to do, more in the mind of David, so my understanding is that we see a lot of the inner turmoil that he's experiencing, as well as the intentions or lack thereof that he has toward Tommy. I'm not considering that in my analysis of this movie, because I haven't read it, and this movie, I believe, especially being written, directed, and starring the same person, is really the product of that person's interpretation. There are also connections to other things. The biggest is probably Lolita, which I've mentioned a few times. In that book and movies, the main character Humbert positions himself as a tragic lover, not a predator, even as the reader can see the horror that he's creating. And I definitely see a lot of similarities to the movie Leon, the Professional. That's a movie where Natalie Portman plays a young girl around this age, maybe 12, with a rough home life, and when her family is killed by an angry drug dealer, she runs off with the quiet hitman who lives down the hall, and they develop a quasi-romantic relationship. In the case of that movie, the romance is pretty much entirely coming from the young girl's side, and the adult seems mostly indifferent and a little weirded out by it. I don't think it's controversial to say that that's a better movie than this, and I don't mean that as an insult. This is not a bad movie, that's just a better one. To wrap up, at the end of Lamb, we're left disturbed not just by what happened, but by how mundane and familiar it feels. David isn't a stereotype with a white van. He's not a movie monster. He's a lonely man who convinces himself that he's doing good, even as he slides toward devastating harm. And that's the brilliance of indie cinema at its best. It can handle taboo subjects without simplifying them, without flattening characters into archetypes. It can ask us to sit in discomfort and reflect on our own limits. For me, Lamb is a film about complicity, about how grooming doesn't always look like violence at first. Sometimes it looks like kindness, like understanding, like attention. And it's about how easy it is to confuse empathy for someone suffering with excusing their actions. because empathy can go too far. Safe empathy can let us recognize pain without losing sight of harm. Unsafe empathy blurs the line, lets us get swept up in justifying what ultimately can't be justified. Lamb asks us how sure we are that we know the difference. So, I'd like to try to rate the movies that we watch on this show on 3 different topics. Overall quality, discomfort, and would you rewatch it or recommend it? So as far as overall quality, I might go so far as to give it a 7.5 out of 10. It's a really good movie, even if I had a lot of strong feelings about it. For discomfort, I would say 7 out of 10. There were parts of this movie that were so deeply resonant with me that I could feel it physically in my body. It stuck with me so much that it was the first movie I wanted to cover on the show, so that should tell you something. And as far as rewatching it or recommending it, 3 out of 10. Did I mention how many times I had to watch this movie? I'm happy to never see it again. And I definitely wouldn't recommend it to people because I think that just makes you come off like a pedophile. And now something I'm excited to talk about is antidotes. So if our listeners don't feel great after watching this movie or listening to me talk about it, what can I suggest as an antidote? What is the opposite of this movie? You could go for the unlikely, buddy, heartwarming road trip movies that I brought up at the start. The Fundamentals of Caring from 2016 is a movie where Paul Rudd plays a guy who becomes a caretaker for a cranky and reclusive disabled teen boy and takes him on a road trip where they both learn a lot about life. And then The Long Dumb Road was the 2018 Jason Mantzoukas and Tony Revolori movie. They meet when Tony's character's having car trouble on the way to college or something. It's been a while since I've seen it. And Jason's character steps in to help and then goes along with him on what becomes a very eventful trip across the country. These are both good movies, and they balance comedy and emotion very well. Fundamentals of Caring is a little more feel-good, and The Long Dumb Road leans kind of dark, but I think if you're going for something that has a similar flavor to this movie, but with less of an emotional toll, it's definitely a good option, either one. Or if you want an age gap relationship that's less problematic, you could try Harold and Maude, which is a movie from 1971, where a rich teenager who's obsessed with death meets an eccentric woman in her 70s, and they go on adventures and develop an unlikely romantic relationship. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Cinematic Discomfort. If you've got more thoughts about today's film that you want to share with us, or you want to tell me about your favorite Degrassi plotline, please reach out to us on social media. We're on Instagram as @CinematicDiscomfortPod, or you can find me directly at Charlie Danny Perry. That's Charlie with an I-E, Danny with an I, and Perry with a Y. And if you want more conversations about films that disturb, unsettle, and stay with us long after the credits roll, make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to share it with a weird friend. You can also rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening, and leave us a review. Until next time, take care of yourselves and don't take cigarettes from strangers.